Right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to crack on. As you would have sort of picked up from those first three presentations, one of the things we're dealing with is it's the scale of change to get to a place where we are all comfortable. But that change isn't necessarily easy. It's not a smooth ride, even though there may be great benefits for town centres at the end of it. And so I thought it would be really useful for us to have a conversation about transition, just to discuss that level of change in a way which is, fairly honest and open. So I think I've got a pretty good panel to have a good discussion with as well. So thank you to all the panel. I'm going to come to you one by one. I'm going to start with Alison Dewey, who is with Southend-On-Sea Borough Council. She obviously joined us very late in the day because our other speaker, who was going to be talking about floods and flood resilience, had to drop out at very short notice. So Alison, I'm hugely grateful for you to join us. I promise we will go easy on you. So my first question to you is, what is the meaning of life, and how will Brexit turn out? No. I want you to start by just telling us your recent experiences with flooding in Southend following the succession of storms we've had.
Yeah, it was. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, it was really late in the day. I only phoned OJ up yesterday to actually book on to the conference. So, obviously in Southend, we're a coastal destination. We've got 7 miles of coastline. I'm not sure if you're all pretty conversant with it, but between Southend Pier and Casino, Genting Casino, there is no actual sea wall. So the highway sits proud at the most sort of severe high tides, usually spring high tides, about 50 mil, which is not a lot, above the water level. So you do get a bit of spillage over. It's quite common to see that. However, sort of Storm Kira was quite a game changer for us. I'm not sure if any of you have seen much of social media, but some of the experiences of Southend, the estuary was literally across the dual carriageway, which was quite shocking to see and had a massive impact on a lot of local businesses there, seafront traders, who ironically were reaping the economic benefits of the 2018 summer that one of the chaps this morning discussed. So it had a massive impact. And also for myself and my colleague Marzia, our office is in Southend Pier. We've been fortunate enough to have a lovely office on the pier for about 11 years, and we've seen flooding, but not to the scale that we saw a couple of weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. So much so that the walkway underneath the pier as well was you could swim through it. Basically, it's about 12 foot of water. It was pretty shocking, and also for us on the pier, the waves. It's the first time we've seen this as well. That actually crashing up through underneath the floor, and we were walking around in about an inch of seawater. We've been there 11 years, and as I say, we've going back sort of 7-8 years ago, we didn't see these sort of levels of flooding. We have been, and it's been more often, and it's getting more severe. And obviously, there's a fantastic piece of engineering about 20 miles up the estuary, which would be the Thames Barrier. So I was speaking to one of the flood engineers yesterday. So with the high tide that coincided with Storm Kira, coupled with the barrier closing, that added another 0.5 metre. So that 50 mil lip just really didn't do anything at all. So there is a conversation in Southend about, this isn't going away. It's actually probably going to get worse, as we was all seeing from some stats today. And how do we cope with this, rather than just building a wall, but sticking plasters is probably not the answer. So it's something for us to really think about moving forward.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I guess it really has in terms of long-term impact for a town centre as well. I guess issues like that start to impact the investment decisions of various stakeholders as well. So the case we were actually going to talk about with Rotherham Council was the fact that at an ATCM North East event, we'd got a fabulous presentation from Rotherham about the development that was going to happen, the cinema complex that was going to come in, and some of it's been held up just because of the levels of flooding they've had recently, and the fact that flood resilience has to go in first. Are you thinking it's a fairly similar situation?
Yeah, absolutely, because Southend, the Western Esplanade is a main artery actually through the town centre. So, and obviously we've got some huge stakeholders, some big businesses on the seafront. So obviously, literally, the infrastructure was just practically closed to get from sort of, you know, east to west Southend. Was incredibly difficult, so had a knock-on effect everywhere. But again, it's, you know, we were listening to Victoria Marzia and I earlier, and some of the stuff that she was talking about around drainage. So we've got projects such as Sponge and Cool Towns, and they are doing some great stuff and thinking ahead. But, you know, actually, you know, our biggest asset is also going to be perhaps our biggest issue moving forward. So yeah, absolutely, for sure, it's something that we've got to think, and actually looking at the figures earlier, perhaps think a bit quicker. Yeah, of course.
Okay, considering I've dragged you onto the panel kicking and screaming without any preparation, that's a really good start. So now I want to introduce Adrian Watson, who is CEO of Aberdeen Inspired. I think a lot of you will probably know Adrian already because his beard is multi-award winning. The work they do is fantastic. But actually, Adrian, the core of some of your best work actually comes from the fact that Aberdeen, which is, let's face it, the UK's energy city, hit troubles in terms of the economic situation a few years ago. Is that right?
It is, OJ. I suppose in some respects I'm the villain of the piece. For so long we were the oil and gas capital, not only of the UK, but of Europe. You know, and we're very proud of that title, and it served us well, as it did most of you people, for the last 30 or 40 years. And dare I say, when we talk about the subject today, there's a great deal of complacency had set in. We were in our own bubble up in the northeast of Scotland. We'd never had it so good. The high street was thriving, whilst other areas suffered the crashes. Very similar house prices to London and all that went with that. And then, as OJ rightly says, at the end of 2014-15, that was a crash for my city and the wider northeast of Scotland. And it coincided with business rates re-evaluation as well. So they were working on the premise that we were still thriving and all that went with that. And I don't expect a lot of sympathy. I'm sure when we talked about mining and other heavy industries over the years, those challenges that came to certain areas, we knew holistically that we need to move forward. And there are very compelling reasons, be it Southend and other areas, and you know, other presentations have been given this morning, that show that it's stark and we needed to change. But we went through that pain that was amplified with business rates in the northeast. We haven't recovered. We've lost 150,000 jobs in the North Sea Basin. Again, a price of transition. GDP is coming down because we were a big giver of that to the UK economy. So that's a challenge, not only for ourselves in the northeast, for Scottish Government and of course the wider UK. So what to do? Because we can't just sit there, nor would we, and lick our wounds. We're seen as entrepreneurs up in the northeast. We've been through various reincarnations in the past, through heavy industries, through fishing, through all the rest, coming through oil and gas. We're now trying to position ourselves respectfully to others as the energy capital. That subtle change. We've got a lot of wind. Not least for myself. But we have a lot of wind up in the north of Scotland, as you can imagine, and we're trying to harness that in the North Sea, in the Moray Firth, onshore as well, as was mentioned by Professor Jennings this morning. We've got tidal power, we've got real opportunities up there. We won't get that 150,000 jobs back, we understand that, but incrementally we're moving across. The bid sits in the city centre. Those of you who don't know, Aberdeen Inspired, we represent 900 levy payers, but moving beyond that, we see ourselves as a regional player through this difficult transition. And we've got an umbrella organisation. Tell me if I'm labouring on, would you?
This is all good stuff.
We have a kind of macro group under, ironically, Sir Ian Wood, who was an oil magnate, the Wood Group, as it was known previously, now Wood. He decided some time ago, probably before most of us, again respectfully, that things were changing, that we needed to move. And it wasn't all just through the environmental need and cause, it was because of umpteen variables. But oil and gas was going to be yesterday's news as he saw it. It's still there, it's still resilient, and it needs to be. as we make this transition. But he thought we need to diversify in the North East. We're too dependent on one industry, and that being oil and gas at the time. So he brought the councils, Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire respectfully, and a host of other partners, the Chamber, and including ourselves as not a peripheral player, but one of the lesser players initially, and started to look at life sciences, food and drink. We've got plenty going on up in the North East, Aberdeen Angus not least. Tourism, people normally gravitate towards Edinburgh or the Scottish Highlands. The northeast of Scotland has Balmoral. It's got the most castles in the UK, if not Europe. It's got lovely rivers. It's got distilleries, very close to our hearts. It's got so much going for it. So he started to develop some of that thinking as well in strategic strands, lining it all up very nicely with the key partners and driving it forward. And then amongst that, there is now £9 billion worth of investment in the northeast. We have a new South Harbour that will very gladly entertain the cruise ship market next year, because we see ourselves as position ourselves in the northern basin of Europe for that. We've got a new exhibition centre in Aberdeen, which had the Sports Personality of the Year very recently. So again, very different for us, because we didn't have to try before. We've got a new road, which was in the city plan in 1946. We don't rush into things in the northeast. It is affectionately known as the Aberdeen Bypass, but as a city centre organisation, I vehemently push back on that. It is the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route that brings people in seamlessly to my city centre, but also navigates you around the city as well. And we've got lots of other infrastructure projects, even in the city centre, a new revamped art gallery and all the rest, because we're moving towards that, as I go back to say, tourism, food and drink, and diversification of industry. And the bed has a big part to play. And I'll shut up.
Fantastic. And I'd like to introduce Kelvin Reynolds from the British Parking Association to talk about parking infrastructure and some of the transition that's happening there.
Thank you, OJ. I thought parking was the villain of the piece. So we're the guys who come out and just enforce and issue penalty charge notices and stuff like that and stop people from parking in town centres. Well, actually, we're not. And we've heard some things this morning, and I just wondered, I did a little bit of reminiscing. How many of you walked to school as a child? How many of you drive your kids to school now? Why do you do that? Exactly. We've changed our living. We've changed the way we live. We've changed the way we live. We've done a piece of work recently around healthcare parking. And the government has made some recent announcements on free parking at hospitals for particular groups of people. And this is all very flavoursome and very socially responsible to provide free parking for people at hospitals. But actually, we know that free parking increases demand. And we know that free parking increases traffic. If the NHS can't lead the way in changing sustainable transport, who does? Because we have one government arm wanting to promote free parking, and we have another government arm wanting to reduce the need to travel. And we don't quite work out how you do that. How many of you have been stuck in traffic? How many of you realise that you are the traffic?
No.
And I think it's about time we changed the way we think and changed the way we do. And it's about time we reduced the need to travel in the first place. Electric vehicles are great. But actually, they're not changing the number of cars we've got on the road. A self-driving vehicle, what problem are they trying to solve? I like driving my car. I don't drive it very often because most of the time it sits on the driveway. Did you know that most vehicles are only in use for 2 hours a day? And for 22 hours of the day, they're parked somewhere. Think about it. You drive to work in the morning, you drive to work, drive home again in the evening. And for the rest of the time, it's on your driveway or in a car park or on the street somewhere outside someone else's house. That's unsustainable. We've been doing that for 50 years. We have to change the way we use our motor cars. EVs are great. They will reduce pollution in town centres, but they won't reduce congestion. Self-driving cars won't reduce congestion. In fact, a research study in Rotterdam at Erasmus University showed that 40% of the people that currently use public transport, if they had a choice of an autonomous vehicle, they'd be in it. That's not good for congestion. So we just need to think about what we mean by sustainable transport. And the parking community is here to help, because we can help do lots of things. Yes, we can think about energy and infrastructure. And some of the things we're working on at the moment include a project which will be announced in the coming days with the University of Sussex on how you can reinvent a car park. Think about 500 vehicles parked in a car park with a battery in them. What can you do with that energy while it's sitting there for 10 hours at a time? What can you do with that energy? People talk about range anxiety. My wife is having a conversation with me about, or I'm having a conversation about whether I should switch my gas guzzling Audi 3.5 into an EV. I'd love to, but actually she talks about, well, what about when we do this and what about when we do that? And I say, how often do we do that? And the answer is once a year or twice a year. Almost every trip we make is less than 5 miles. And every EV on the road today can do 200 miles on one charge. Where's the range anxiety in that? We've got lots to think about. But 500 vehicles in a car park. Let me tell you, not wishing to be an alarmist, thinking about the guy at the right at the beginning. We have some of the safest car parks in the country, in the world, in the UK. We've had 5 fires in car parks in the UK in 50 years. That's amazingly safe. The most recent one of any significance was in Liverpool 2 years ago. 80% of those fires in car parks have been caused by an electrical fault. We are now expecting consumers to plug their cars in car parks. We have a whole team of people thinking about what that means going forward and how we need to think about building regulations and how we need to think about the way energy is used and consumed and so on. I'll pass over now, I suspect, and we're happy to take some questions.
Fire issues, Kelvin. The number of issues I keep writing down, it's growing, it's multiplying. That's great as an introduction. And then finally, can I introduce David Johnston from Wedlake Bell? He's also the chair of Revo's Sustainability Committee. We've already heard about the challenges we've got in terms of property and how much carbon they emit. And obviously, it's going to be the same, not just for residential property, but also for commercial property. David, how do we fix it?
Well, being the lawyer in the room, I know I'm the villain, so that's an easy one to start with. Yeah, so 2 hats. So I'm a commercial property lawyer. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a planner. But I also chair the Revo Sustainability and Community Engagement Committee, and that last bit is, I think, key, because sustainability is about people. It's not just about buildings. So that community engagement, it flicks into everything everyone's been saying. We're talking about where people live. How do we fix it? Well, what I said to AJ earlier is you've got to follow the money. So is there a reason why we didn't 10, 12 years ago go down the display energy certificate route? So that ongoing, what's this building doing? Well, it was because Treasury stopped it. Is there a reason why shopping centres are no longer flavour of the month? Well, it's because nobody will buy them, because the values, nobody knows what the value is. Is there a reason why the flooding is not just the personal tragedy that's happening for the people that have been flooded, but it's the fact that it shows that our model of insurance doesn't really work? And looking at some studies done by Munich Re, one of the biggest reinsurers in the world, in terms of climate emergency and climate change, the number of volcanoes, earthquakes hasn't really changed. Numbers of typhoons and hurricanes hasn't really changed, but I do accept they've hit places that have been less able to deal with them. The one element of climate-related disaster stroke catastrophe has been in relation to flood-style risk. because we have got people living in places that people never used to live. And I'm afraid that comes down to money, because people have been allowed to build and live there. So what I would say to answer your question, AJ, is follow the money.